All right. My name is Harrison, and my final project was on the post-racial framing following the election of Barack Obama and the impact that had on the Shelby v. Holder decision. So, just for some background, following the 2008 election of President Barack Obama, many news and media outlets claimed that racism in the United States was officially over. They did so in a variety of ways, but essentially championing the idea that because a black president has now been elected, then it must be impossible for the United States to be a racist nation. This was prevalent across left and right leaning news and media outlets. And this was a consistent theme leading up to the election and in the time following it. So, in the time following it, this rhetoric and frame really began to continue to grow and infiltrate the minds of politicians and the public, and ultimately leading to 13 years of racial progress backsliding. Essentially, while there was progress made in the last 13 years, we've also seen a lot of instances of backsliding. And the most notable example of this was the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act, essentially gutting the preclearance requirement, meaning that states can pass laws however they please without needing any federal approval, leading to discriminatory outcomes. So for my project, I looked at the relationship between these two events, the 2008 Obama election and the 2013 Shelby v. Holder decision. My hypothesis is that the media rhetoric and framing of the 2008 election created a social and political climate that allowed for decisions such as Shelby v. Holder to be made. So essentially saying that the media primed the public and politicians to believe that racism was over. And given that Shelby v. Holder was a decision that, in a way, was the court signifying that racism was over, or at least protections for racism in voting was over, I wanted to see if I could create a link between these two events. So, in order to create a causal link between these two seemingly unrelated events, because they do occur 5 years apart, and obviously there were lots of factors that went in to the court's decision, I looked for parallels between the rhetoric and logic used in the media and the language used by Chief Justice John Roberts in the court's majority decision. So, comparing media frames with the explicit language set forth by the Supreme Court. I used 15 news articles published in the year 2008 using keyword searches. I would pair Obama election with phrases such as post-racial, end of racism, and racism over, making sure to set the time frame only to 2008. I identified the key frames in these articles and then matched them with the corresponding language in the court's decision. So, in doing that, the most prominent media frame was that if Barack Obama can be elected president as a black man, then racism must no longer exist. This was sort of overarching and occurred in a few different ways. People basically saying that um, you know black people no longer have barriers to do the things that they want to do because look at what Obama was able to achieve. And so the parallel from the Shelby v. Holder decision comes from Justice Roberts saying that minority candidates now hold office at unprecedented levels, and covered jurisdictions have far more black office holders as a proportion of the black population than do uncovered ones. So Justice Roberts is essentially uh, patting himself and America on the back for minority candidates now holding offices in the same way that the media was patting itself in America on the back for the fact that there is a black president. So focusing on the success of a few individuals in the field of elected office for both the media and for Justice Roberts means that racism as a whole and racist policies and institutions can no longer exist. When in reality, these candidates or Obama's election is really much more of a symbolic gesture than any institutional change. And so we can see how those two clearly correspond. And then, secondly, maybe less salient, but still very important, the media framing of Barack Obama, uh, his election being a sign of racial progress and in celebrating the racial progress that the country has made. Maybe not necessarily explicitly saying that racism no longer exists, but focusing all the energy on what this means for racial progress, when in reality, it's much more of a symbolic gesture. In Shelby v. Holder, this can be seen again, where Justice Roberts writes that things have changed dramatically and that racism no longer exists on a pervasive, flagrant, widespread, and rampant scale. So, in both cases, the media and Justice Roberts are focusing on progress and focusing on the fact that things aren't as bad as they used to be, and basically using that as a reason that we no longer need to be concerned with these issues, just because we're making progress. When again, in reality, there's still so much to do, and this kind of rhetoric detracts from focusing on those issues. So, to wrap up with the discussion, the findings of this analysis are worrying for the future of racial progress in the United States, especially as the media continues to grow more influential in shaping public opinion through framing. So, as we know, news and media outlets are becoming more and more powerful and more part of the kind of national political narrative. And so these frames are incredibly dangerous, and we're already seeing them following the 2008 election. Um, in order to keep making racial progress and prevent the backsliding that we're seeing, the focus must remain on how much work is left to do. There's no time for people to be patting themselves on the back, in the case of the United States, for electing a black president, because this is what allows the myth of a post racial society to run rampant. And ultimately, while the Shelby v. Holder decision was the product of lots of factors, one of those factors, as showed in this analysis, was clearly the idea that the United States was no longer a racist country, because basically saying why do we need these protections? Well, we don't need them anymore because we're no longer racist. And where did that idea come from? I believe that idea is rooted in the election of Obama in 2008 and the subsequent media frames. And that is my presentation. Thank you.